Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this August 12th. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date on your changing weather situation in your part of Alaska by heading to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. It'll take you to the same place. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. You can find each Weather Service office on Twitter, on Facebook under NWS Alaska. You can just type that into the search bar at the top, or if you go to YouTube and you like a quick peek at what's going on in the mid to late afternoon before you head out the door to maybe do some last-minute fishing for the evening hours, type in AKWX TV and you'll get the full broadcast that you're seeing here now from yesterday at this point. Or if you type in NWS Anchorage or NWS Fairbanks, you'll get that daily afternoon map briefing that many of you have said that you really enjoy there. So if you haven't checked that out lately, do that. It's a sneak peek at what you'll see here on Alaska Weather. Now, for the Juneau area, the Mendenhall River and Glacier is under a flood warning, at least until about noon on Wednesday. Glacially dammed lake area is holding back some additional water. It may be up for a second release. We're not really sure if that's going to happen, but we're watching that carefully. And it's especially interesting thanks to some of the recent heavier rainfall that has been received in that area. Here's some of those numbers there. From 8 a.m. Sunday to 8 a.m. Monday, over 5 inches of rain there at the Snettisham Power Station, over 3 inches around Point Baker, and over 1.5 inches for the Juneau Douglas wastewater treatment plant. That was just until 8 o'clock on Monday. After that, until 8 o'clock today, we've seen another 1.8 inches plus at the Haynes Custom Office. The Haynes area itself has seen about 1.5 inches, and Point Baker over 1 inch. So there's a lot of water that's been falling in northern parts of southeast, so no wonder there's a flood warning, and no wonder the Mendenhall River and Lake is seeing some issues there. So once again, a flood warning for the Juneau region there around the Mendenhall River and the lake due to that glacially damp situation. The record rains, again, still possible for some parts of the Panhandle. Flood warning will continue until noon tomorrow. It's currently around 11.9 feet, which is in minor flood stage already just because of the rain. And again, we'll be watching for that second outburst. It may not happen, but if it does, there's a warning. And again, if you're close to that area, you need to keep close watch on that situation and be prepared to move quickly if the situation develops. Here's a look at the weather satellite picture, and across the eastern parts of the Gulf, we've got a lot of dry air here, but the overall system is focused on pretty expansive area of low pressure across the eastern Aleutians, and that is forcing a lot of very wet weather right across the northern parts of southeast over the last couple days. And another surge is working its way north and east as we head into the next 24 to 48 hours. You'll see some heavier rainfall probably by late Wednesday and into Thursday as a result of that. This is the infrared picture, and you'll notice that there's plenty of high clouds and mid-level clouds across the northern parts of the interior, the northern Yukon, all the way to the northern and western sections of Alaska, and that's where we're finding considerable thunderstorm development in the last 24 hours. A pretty decent chunk of scattered storms have developed between Nome and Fairbanks. And out across the west, quite a few areas of low clouds and probably fog there, with the bulk of the rainfall closer to Dillingham and Kodiak, and north of Unalaska as the low pressure center there is just to the west of Unalaska. Areas of dry air there from Norton Sound stretching to just about Nunivak Island. I've seen some areas of fog this morning. There's certainly a lot of that just north of the Bering Strait and the Chukchi Seacoast. But by and large, areas south of the Yukon Valley out toward Bethel and Hooper Bay, and even south of the Tanana Valley, probably close to Nenana, and then out toward Northway, have seen a decent amount of sunshine today. So probably a pretty warm day for you. You'll notice on the visible satellite picture once again some breaks in the cloud cover south and west of Kodiak, and the core of that very wet weather again is focusing in on south central Alaska at this point. But over the next few days, it's gradually going to turn that fire hose a little bit more toward Yakutat and probably and eventually northern parts of southeast once again. So If you're seeing a flood warning now, you might need to be prepared for more of that as we head toward the end of the week. Here's the weather map. Low pressure is sitting at 984 millibars. The occluded front represents the place where that cold air has overtaken the warmer air. So that process will likely continue a little bit more out over the Gulf as we head into the next 24 hours. A southerly flow across the central and western Gulf. You can see the rainfall working its way into south central today and southwestern Alaska and Bristol Bay out toward the Pribilofs and the central and eastern chain. This type of pattern starts to force a lot of air across the northern Gulf as well, so mariners beware. Gales will be up and are up already for Prince William Sound and outside of Prince William Sound. Look for some stronger gusts there around the Hinchinbrook entrance as well. So the winds are coming up in that area. That's the only place that I'm aware of that we have gale warnings in effect for the next couple hours there, and certainly tonight and tomorrow. As you can see, that frontal boundary closing in on the northern Gulf will restrict that airflow into more of a confined space. And just like a fast-moving river, when it goes through rapids, it has to speed up to keep that volume of water equal on either end, and that's what we see here. Out across south-central Alaska, watch for some gusty winds moving through Turnagain Arm and the higher terrain as we head through tonight and tomorrow, likely seeing some stronger gusts through that period. Then we're going to watch for some more rain to work its way through northern parts of southeast. Should be a little bit more isolated tonight, but as we head into the next 24 hours, look for more showers across the Brooks Range, not across the Alaska Peninsula, and more spotty wet weather and more fog and breezy conditions than anything else across the central and western chain. By Wednesday, here comes another slug of rain across the north and eastern coast. That means the focus for heavier rainfall across northern southeast will be back in action there. A cold front now working its way through the central Gulf. Wraparound rainfall for Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, YK coastline. More likely showers than anything else across the southern slopes of the Brooks Range, but across the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound. A scattering of thunderstorms may develop once again as you're in that warm and unstable area where that's possible. It's also meeting up with some colder air across the Bering Strait. By Wednesday, healthy east to westerly flow continues across the Arctic coast. You'll likely see more stronger or breezy conditions than any wet weather for you. Showers may develop those as you head out toward Kivalina. Scattering of thunderstorms still possible around Kotzebue Sound and the Seward Peninsula, with showers and thunderstorms forming along the Alaska Range and north, also just south of the Yukon Valley and across the Bristol Bay and Killbuck Mountains north of Dillingham, with few showers there across the central and eastern chain. Low pressure still in action across south central, and more of these waves are coming in from the west. Our newest player there just south of the Aleutians at 998 millibars to keep things stirred up for us, with southeast still under the gun for some at least moderate rainfall and probably some occasionally heavier rainfall as we go toward the end of the week. Temperature-wise, expect high temperatures today. We're probably in the mid-60s for most areas in southeast, 68 around Klawock and Craig, 73 around Hyder, 64 around Juneau, 62 in Sitka. Pretty mild day there after the sun came out for many folks there. 59 in Yakutat around Prince William Sound. Upper 50s did the trick. Homer and Seward in the lower 60s today. Anchorage made it to 60 degrees. 57 there in Talkeetna. Mid-60s for the Tanana Valley and Nenana, Healy, and Greeley, all seeing a fairly mild day. 66 in Fairbanks. Northway and Eagle in the mid to upper 60s. 59 at Fort Yukon this afternoon. 70 as you get toward Ambler and Bettles. 54 in Anaktuvuk Pass. The Arctic coast was showing temps in the 30s and 40s. Kaktovik was not reporting. 50s, 60s, and low 70s for a good part of Kotzebue Sound. Shishmaref was 59, Kivalina at 70, Kotzebue 71. Pretty toasty stuff there. 66 in Nome. Unalakleet was showing 66, 71 in McGrath. Grayling was about 68 degrees, 70 in Bethel, with Nunivak Island around 63. The Alaska Peninsula was in the upper 50s to lower 60s, with Cold Bay and Falls Pass straddling the 60-degree mark. Right there on the button there, Kodiak. 57 in Sandpoint, and mid-50s for the Pribilofs, with low to mid-50s for a good part of the central and eastern chain. As you take a look at temperatures across the region for tonight, expect lows in the lower 50s for the chain and the Alaska Peninsula, the YK coastline and Delta, generally in the lower to mid-50s. Unalakleet about 55, just a hair cooler, and Nome 48 for St. Lawrence. The western slopes of the Brooks Range and south-facing slopes, I should say, of the western Brooks Range, probably some of the warmest weather right there around Kotzebue Sound. Temperatures may hold in the lower to mid-50s, even 60 degrees in some cases if the air is blowing just right. Lower to mid-30s for the Arctic coast, lower 50s for the Tanana Valley around Fairbanks, and about the same there for south central Alaska and the Kenai Peninsula, with southeast looking at temperatures also in the lower to mid-50s. Highs tomorrow will remain in the mid-60s to perhaps even 70 degrees as you get out toward Craig and Klawock, Ketchikan, and Annette. South Central will see temps in the lower 60s, with Prince William Sound likely holding below that 60-degree mark, 59 in Kodiak. Mid-70s for the Middle Tanana Valley, Northway and Eagle, and westward down the Yukon into the lower 60s. The Yukon-Kuskokwim coastline likely looking at temps in the upper 50s, but just inland, places like Bethel could be as warm as 65. Lower 60s for the Alaska Peninsula, mid to upper 50s for the Chain and the Arctic coast, holding from 40 to about 50 degrees between Barrow, Prudhoe Bay, and Dead Horse, with Wainwright at about 47. Onward we go to your flying weather now, and IFR conditions should be expected across the northern Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, into parts of the Cook Inlet, over the Barren Islands, MVFR for the northern parts of Southeast, and IFR for the southern tip of the Kodiak Island region. IFR also on the Chukchi Seacoast and just offshore to St. Lawrence Island, the Pribilofs, and the central and western chain. And again, don't forget about the thunderstorms there. Past conditions include VFR flying for Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass for your Wednesday. As far as Lake Clark and Merrill Pass go, we expect to see that turn heading toward IFR conditions during the day. Rainy Pass should go toward IFR as well. Windy Pass likely MVFR. Isabel Pass heading for marginal conditions. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see VFR through most of the day. And as we go down toward Tanita Pass, MVFR conditions should be developing. Portage Pass likely IFR with MVFR maybe on the western side, but most of the inlet should be okay for a good part of the day. Chilcoot White Pass probably leaning back toward IFR as the front gets closer to your region. Freezing levels still remain between 10 and 12,000 feet across a good part of southeast. 8,000-foot lines there just offshore of the Chukchi Seacoast and wrapping around the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and Bristol Bay areas. As far as icing potential goes, you'll still have to go pretty high up there. We still have a pretty good slug of warm but wet air across the region. Most of what you'll see here across the Gulf and south central Alaska is above 10,000 feet. Across the western chain, you might find some light to isolated moderate rime above 8,000 feet. Most other areas have more of an insignificant concern at this point that's not terribly widespread. The jet stream shows a powerful zone of low pressure across the Bering that is helping to drive the northerly flow into the main core of the jet, positioned to the south of Alaska at this point. The stronger winds there around 115 knots. This trough is slowly moving eastward, not at a great clip. It's got some faster moving winds coming in from the south. That's aiding that additional precipitation working through the Gulf. More of a stronger easterly flow across the Arctic coast, and that is supported at the surface by winds there that are also moving at a pretty good clip between 25 and 35 knots at times. At 9,000 feet, we have a southerly flow crossing the Arctic coast, though, so a little bit of a change at that level. An easterly offshore flow moving in from the east, actually southeast at sometimes, across Seward Peninsula, the Kotzebue Sound, and the YK coastline. A low pressure system just south of the Sand Point area, about 10 knots, a broad southerly flow over the Gulf, and a south and southwesterly flow makes its way into southeastern Alaska, with westerlies coming across the central and western chain around 50 knots. At 3,000 feet, you can see low pressure there, pretty much in the same spot. We still have our support from the south coming across the Gulf with plenty of water for Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island, and the northern coast there. Wind speeds at this level reaching Yakutat at around 25 knots, about the same there for Dutch Harbor and Unalaska. More of an easterly flow developing across Nome and Norton Sound, and southerly still reaching the Brooks Range and Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass around 20 knots or so you might find a little bit of chop in that area. As far as turbulence goes, the more broad-scale turbulence issues that we see for tomorrow, certainly across the Gulf, right along that frontal boundary there with that tighter packing of pressure gradient. Right across the northern Gulf, watch for some stronger wind gusts there. You could see some winds in excess of 40 knots fairly easily, but in a pretty narrow strip confined to areas just offshore of the coast. Around Prince William Sound, watch for some chop, and also in the lee of the Kenai Mountains and Chugach, probably below about 8,000 feet. Across the Arctic coast, below 4,000 feet, you should run into some light to isolated moderate turbulence, and also across the central chain below 4,000 feet there for Adak and Atka, maybe some points eastward as that next wave of low pressure moves slightly toward your area. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned.
During the past week, you have probably heard at least one news story about a missing hiker, a fisherman, or a pilot and passengers. If that missing person is someday you, the next 7 minutes, the length of this video, can make a difference in whether you live or die. Two experts on survival, Captain Pete Savage and Warrant Officer Steve Lewis of the Alaska Army National Guard, have 7 steps to follow if you ever find yourself stranded in the wilderness. The 7 steps to survival are recognition, inventory, signaling, shelter, water, food, and play.
Hey, when you ever find yourself in a survival situation, you kind of want to think of the 7 steps of survival to kind of get you in the right flow and get you moving in the right direction to successfully survive a situation that you might not otherwise do. Recognition is probably one of the most important steps in a survival situation, because that's knowing that you're getting yourself into a bad situation and going, hey, am I starting to get hypothermic? Am I cold? Am I lost? Am I somewhere I shouldn't be? And do I need to hunker down for the night? And so make sure that I can survive the night and survive the next couple of days, if that's how long it's going to take me to get out of this specific situation or to get rescued.
The second step to survival is inventory. That's checking every pocket, bag, and the surrounding area for anything that can help you survive.
Inventory is also very important, because there's been some instances I've read about up in Fairbanks where a lady was with her couple of kids, and she was out for, I don't remember the specific amount of time, but it was significant, and she couldn't start a fire because she didn't have any matches. And then when she was at home going through her stuff to throw it in the wash, I heard she came up with a little lighter in her pocket she didn't even know about. And the situation could be even worse than that. So make sure you check all your pockets, check all your survival gear and all the little pockets in your pack and so on. Look for anything that might be useful, and never throw anything away. You can imagine that a safety clip might seem insignificant at one point, but a day later it could be something to tie your jacket back together if a zipper broke. You basically have active signals, like your flares and smoke signals and fires and so on, that take a moderate amount of work to keep going, whereas your passive signals, your panel markers, VS-17s, and so on, you just lay out. And
Lewis says a key thing to remember about active signals is to make sure that before you use them, an airplane or search party is close enough to see the signal.
There's lots of situations where people pop their smoke or pop their flares, and there's no planes or anybody around to see it. And then they're gone when the plane does fly by. And a plane could fly right over the top of us right now. And if we didn't have a way to signal them, we'd be out of luck.
Shelter is the 4th step to survival, and Savage and Lewis show us how to construct a lean-to using just natural vegetation, common to many areas in Alaska.
Here you have a lean-to shelter using skunk cabbage leaves like shingles to dissipate water from the roof of an improvised shelter. Not only can you use natural vegetation, but you can use water-repellent materials such as a poncho, visqueen, even the skin of a plane can be used in a shingle-type fashion. These are very water-repellent, and they are very good natural vegetation. You'll find them in a lot of low-lying areas. You also have pine boughs that we can use. They'll break the wind from entering the shelter. I'm going to stay warm and dry. That's the biggest thing. This primarily keeps me dry from the wet ground. I put it on. One match here, get it down here. You start with small kindling and tinder, and you make sure that gets going good. Okay, once I've got my fire started, it dissipates most of the bugs. It throws a little heat this way into the shelter. I want to block maybe any wind coming in with my big leaves from the skunk cabbage. I can either use that or boughs. Take the bivy sack, put it on up over my shoulder, and now I can lie down and rest.
Your body can't function very long without water, so the 5th step to survival is water collection. Savage explains how to collect and purify water in the wilderness.
We have a number of items set up, like a poncho catch basin, which water comes down as it comes down from the sky as rain, catches in a basin that's made from your poncho, and it filters out through the neck of the poncho, where you can either have a canteen at the bottom where you can catch that water for drinkable water. You can also use water out of streams. The only problem is that some of the streams have algae and bacteria in them that can make you sick. So they do make filters now, like Kakadin water filters, which are ceramic filters. It'll screen some of the microorganisms in the water so that it won't affect you, that are fairly small and miniaturized that you can put in a survival kit. They also make tablets that will actually kill the bacteria or the microorganisms in the water, but you're still drinking it without a filtration system.
As your animal comes across here and trips this thing here, it pops down and the rock hits the animal. And voila, dinner.
Food is an obvious component of survival, but keeping a high morale is also important. Savage and Lewis combine the final two steps for survival, food and play, into one, showing how to make the search for food fun.
What I have is I'll have is a rope with a little stick tied on the back of it. What I do is I just stick it through here, through the little A, inverted A you have here, and it basically locks back there real easy. And what then you do is you take this and kind of turn it down so that you can stick a trigger stick under there that will just barely hold it back there rather than really severely holding it back there. You stick the stick back there. Then this little triggering device is where you're going to have your food, and the animal just has to just barely touch the food, and the rock comes dropping down.
What you see here is a rabbit coming down the game trail. You'll look at the snare that has the piece of peanut butter. My hand, being the animal, will go ahead and grab the bait stick where the morsel is, and he thinks he's going to get away with it, but as he trips it, he gets caught. I'm caught on the wire. You can see this wire here, that's to the stick, and I can't get away.
Time for your marine weather forecast now for southeastern Alaska. Look for south and southeasterly winds to be predominant for the next 24 hours or so at least, as low pressure is located to your west. Winds will be a little bit stronger in the northern Gulf Coast around Yakutat. Look for a southeasterly flow at 30 knots, more of a 15 to 20 knot flow coming into Sitka and Craig with 6 to 7 foot seas there, and seas between 2 and 4 feet in the inner waterways, the strongest and highest of which will be up across the Lynn Canal. A little bit stronger in the northern Lynn Canal at 20 knots from the south with a 4 foot sea, slightly less than that for the southern Lynn Canal. As we get into Thursday, look for a southeasterly flow throughout your day, about 10 to 15 knots there through the inner waterways, seas ranging between 2 and 3 feet from Petersburg down toward Ketchikan and Metlakatla. As you get across the coastal areas, more of a south and southeasterly flow is still with us there. 25 knots and diminishing outside of Yakutat with a 9 foot sea expected. Also outside of the northern entrances. Around the Dixon entrance, that's a 20 knot flow with an 8 foot sea expected by Thursday. As we get into south central, the strongest winds and probably the highest gusts and danger potential will be with the gales around Prince William Sound and outside of Prince William Sound, and especially around Hinchinbrook entrance, where you can expect higher gusts there as well. 9 foot seas on the inside of Prince William Sound, 9 to 12 foot seas on the outside, 35 to 40 knot winds sustained, and again there could be some higher gusts on top of that. Easterlies coming into eastern sections of the Kenai Peninsula and western Prince William Sound. Southerlies coming into the southern tip there with about 15 knots with a 9 foot sea. Otherwise, northeasterlies running down Cook Inlet into Shelikof Strait, around 25 knots with 6 to 7 foot seas, 25 knots on the eastern side of Kodiak. That should diminish as we get into Thursday. We'll still have some higher gusts inside and outside of Prince William Sound, but the winds generally are diminishing to about 15 knots on the inside with a 3 foot sea and 9 foot seas on the outside. And those northeasterlies are also dropping down to about 15 knots with 3 foot seas north of Homer to Kenai and into the northern Cook Inlet. Otherwise 6 foot seas as you head outside of Kachemak Bay and west of the Barrens with a 15 knot wind as well from the north and east. Across the Alaska Peninsula, easterlies inside of Bristol Bay, a 3 foot sea there. Southeasterlies east of Chignik and south of Castle Cape, 9 foot seas are expected. Otherwise, light and variable winds north and south of the peninsula with 4 foot seas on the Bering side and 8 foot seas on the Pacific side for Wednesday. By Thursday, a westerly flow south and east of Sandpoint and King Cove. That's around 15 knots with a 7 foot sea. 8 foot seas as you head up a little bit more toward the coast. That becomes southerly as well. A light southeasterly wind inside of Bristol Bay, and we'll keep those light and variable winds north of Cold Bay in the Bering Sea. That's 3 foot seas expected in that region. As we get into the Aleutians for Wednesday, northwesterlies will rule the day with one exception. South of Unalaska and Nikolsky, that's 15 knots from the north with a 9 foot sea. Otherwise 9 to 10 foot seas heading through the Pacific, and 7 to 8 foot seas in the west with more of a northwesterly flow around Kiska. That's up to 8 foot seas there, and then 6 foot seas north of Unalaska and Nikolsky with a 15 knot wind from the north and west for Wednesday. As we get into Thursday, you'll notice those winds shifting a little bit more to the west across the eastern chain, becoming southwesterly as you head a little bit out toward Atka and Adak. That becomes southeasterly there, feeding into another broad area of low pressure that's setting up just to the south of the chain. Northeasterlies around Kiska run up to 25 knots, 6-foot seas there, and northerlies across Attu with a 7-foot sea. For the west coast, we'll have a broad northerly flow coming out of the Bering Strait and through the St. Lawrence Island waters there, across St. Matthew Island, north of Nunivak Island, 15 to 25 knots. Otherwise, 5 to 7-foot seas should be the rule for most areas, with one exception, easterly flow outside of the Kuskokwim Delta at 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. By Thursday, we expect those winds to diminish somewhat. A variable flow north of Nunivak Island. Otherwise, northerlies continue for St. Lawrence, St. Matthew, and out toward the Pribilovs. That wind becomes variable with a 10-knot flow and a 4-foot sea expected almost toward the end of the week. Now, we were talking about some of the faster winds across the Arctic coast earlier. Those winds at the surface are out of the east around 25 knots. They're all the way from Barrow to Wainwright, and then they make the turn to more of a north and northeasterly direction with 6 to 9-foot seas there, otherwise 5 to 6-foot seas in most other areas outside of the Chukchi seacoast. For Thursday, easterlies in pretty much all areas, anywhere from 15 to 25 knots. Seas will be a little bit higher from Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse out toward Kaktovik, and then off of Wainwright, Point Hope, you're expecting 8-foot seas there again for Thursday, so watch the waves. Here's a look at the recap of the weather for tonight, tomorrow, and the next day. Low pressure is working across the Alaska Peninsula as we head through tonight at 988 millibars. It's latching on to a decent amount of Pacific moisture. That could mean some more heavy rain to the northern Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, and gales already in effect for Prince William Sound and outside of Hitchinbrook Entrance in the northern Gulf. Look for a break in the rain for southeast, but more is on the way as the system moves eastward, probably spreading the heaviest rain from Prince William Sound all the way out to the northern parts of southeast, where flood warnings are already in effect for the Mendenhall Lake and River. Showers and thunderstorms could be possible for the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound region again for Wednesday and into Thursday, and then more for the interior as we head toward Thursday. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.